discussion right away. Let me share the screen. Can everybody see my screen? Can someone unmute and let me know?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So the topic of today's lecture is Fourier and Laplace transforms. So let us briefly recap what we discussed in the previous lecture. We first looked at how high gain is that single all-encompassing mantra which gets this magic of inverting a plant whose dynamics is not known very well, and which may be experiencing disturbances and so on. Uh, all the disturbances can be cancelled, and the plant can be inverted if you have high gain controller, and so the feedback of the output combined with high gain control was what was at the heart of our ability to tackle this very challenging problem of control of physical systems with uncertainties. So we pointed out that this analysis doesn't isn't as esoteric. Although the analysis might look esoteric, its practical realization is not as esoteric as it might seem. So we gave the example of on-off control as one manifestation of high gain control. Then we also talked about how on-off control cannot, stabilize systems of higher degree. So if you have underdamped systems and so on and so forth, on-off control is not very good. It's good enough for first order systems like thermal systems and so on, but not for higher order systems. So to address that lacuna, we discuss this other generalized version of on-off control called sliding mode control. Okay, and we showed how both these are just manifestations of high gain control. Then we discussed that although they are very widespread, it is outside the scope of this course to discuss the tools and techniques necessary to understand how they function, to analyze the impact or the effect that these kinds of control techniques have over the system. In other words, its stability and so on and so forth. Okay, so but what is eminently possible, given everything that we have been discussing so far, is to focus on linear control. In other words, we have a high gain, but this high gain is realized by means of another linear system. So the controller itself is going to be a linear system, and its gain is going to be very high. Okay, so that's the kind of controller that we would be targeting. Now, to understand how this control helps with achieving robustness to uncertainty in the plant dynamics or uncertainty in the environment, we decided that we will focus on single input, single output control. So single input, single output systems. Okay, so I discussed that although this looks very restrictive, it actually encompasses a wide range of systems, and many times even dynamic systems which have multiple degrees of freedom can be modeled as single input, single output systems if the coupling between the different generalized coordinates is small. Okay, so it's not as restrictive therefore as it appears. And then we took the example of how high gain helped uh, HS Black when he was confronted with the problem of distortion and crosstalk and so on in connection with repeater amplifiers that he needed for telephony, how negative feedback helped save the day. So we showed through numerical examples how the choice of high gain enables greatly reducing crosstalk, whether it be at the input to the system or at the output of the system, and to achieve robustness to uncertainties in the plant's parameters. In that case, we considered just a simple proportional gain, but that extends to also other kinds of uncertainties. Okay, if you have a differential equation and the coefficients of differential equation are also uncertain, you can achieve robustness. So when I say robustness, I mean that the output, the behavior of the system should be insensitive to the uncertainty either of the plant's model or in its environment. Okay, so we took the example of the negative feedback amplifier. Now, one aspect that we admired in connection with our analysis of negative feedback amplifier was that we could come up with quantitative estimates of how much rejection was possible of a certain disturbance, or how well we could track a certain reference, and if the plant's gain were to change from 10 to 2 or some other intermediate value, to what extent will that affect the output. We could put bounds on how much the output is going to get affected. Okay, and we could also appropriately choose our controller gain to realize whatever bounds we wanted. So in our example, we considered a controller gain of 100. So we could see that the output disturbance could be rejected by over 99%, and likewise the tracking could be better than 99.5% or whatever in its accuracy. So we could put such bounds. Okay, as well as the input disturbance. If you had some disturbance, torque or force or whatever, even that could be rejected by better than 99%. We admired our ability to put numbers to the extent by which we can cancel inputs or uncertainties that afflict our system. And we sought a similar ability to put numbers to our ability to suppress disturbances and achieve robustness to plant uncertainties. Plant uncertainties in the dynamic model of the plant, even when the plant was dynamic. It was not a simple proportional relationship between the input and the output, but there was some differential equation that related the input to the plant to its output. Okay, when we attempted that, we discovered that state space formalism, for all its advantages and its flexibility and its generality and so on and so forth, did not help us to as readily see to what extent we could suppress disturbance as we could with the negative feedback amplifier example. Okay, that was primarily because the expression relating the output y to the disturbance was a integral. Okay, 0 to t c e to the power a t minus tau b d naught of tau d tau. Okay, this is a convolution integration. Convolution is a non-intuitive operation. We cannot easily predict what the outcome of this complicated multiplication and its subsequent integration would be, as we would what the outcome of a direct proportionality would be. So that was at the heart of the problem with this particular formalism, and therefore we sought a different hopefully a different way of looking at the problem, which converts a convolution operation into a product operation, and that was where we found use for the Fourier transforms. Okay, then we talked about what Fourier transform mean. So we talked about how, to us system engineers, the word transform is not the most helpful one, because it means that we are changing the appearance of the signal altogether, and therefore the identity of that signal is lost. Okay, whereas instead of looking at it as frequency Fourier transform, if we look at the word frequency content, that is a lot more evocative, and we understand, at least at some qualitative level, that frequency content refers to the quantity of every frequency that exists in a particular signal. Okay, so more mathematically, we represent the signal u of t in terms of these elementary functions e to the power j omega t, and the quantity of each of these elementary functions that we need to reconstruct that signal is u of j omega d omega. So the overall signal is just the integral of all of these things, and there is a normalizing factor there, and the integral goes from minus infinity to plus infinity. And u of j omega, which is the quantity that we need, if you are given a certain signal, you can obtain that quantity, and that's given by integral minus infinity to infinity e to the power minus j omega t u of t dt. Okay, so this was a more useful interpretation of the Fourier transform, because it helps us, in our mind. I gave this analogy of a house which is built by materials of various sizes, and U of j omega is in some sense analogous to a a list that tells us what quantity or what weight of a particular material has gone into construction of that house. Okay, so this was where we had stopped. Let us pick up from here. Let us see how we can use this tool of Fourier transform to come up with a similar intuitive understanding of the extent by which the disturbance can be rejected or robustness can be achieved, uh, you know uh, uh, based on the appropriate gain that we choose for our controller. Okay, that is the purpose that we are looking for this tool, and subsequently we will look at its limitations also, and then that will form the basis for introducing a slightly more advanced tool, not very much more advanced, slightly more advanced tool, which is the Laplace transform. Okay, so let us pick up from these two equations. Okay, we
Hello,
talked
sir.
about. Hello, yes.
Yes,
Yes.
sir. That u term, na, u is converted into e power j omega t. Sir,
Ha.
how that those two are related, I could not understand, because u is, let's say, some force or torque or something, and e power j omega t, how those are related? Can you just
So e power j omega t is a basis function. Okay, it is the function you are trying to represent u in terms of those functions. That's it. Okay, so u is not related to e to the power j omega t. Okay, this equation only tells you how much of that particular material e power j omega t you need to construct u. Now, if this looks a little mysterious to you, let me point to some other machinery which is very analogous to this, which you are already very familiar with, and that is a machinery of Fourier series. Okay, so if u of t in this case was a sinusoidal signal or a periodic signal, so let us say I am drawn some signal which repeats every capital T intervals of time. Okay, it's a periodic signal. Then you are well aware that I can write the signal u of t as a summation of sinusoids of the same frequency, which is 2 pi by capital T. So a1 whatever plus b1 cos 2 pi by capital T times t plus its higher harmonics, right? So this breakdown of a periodic signal into its constituent sinusoids is something that we are all far more familiar with compared to the Fourier transform machinery. Okay, now it can be shown that this expression u of t can also be written as summation some k going from minus infinity to infinity e to the power j 2 pi by t times k times t times some complex number ak. Okay, this exact same expression that you are familiar with in this particular form by replacing sine 2 pi by t with in terms of complex exponentials. Okay, noting that e power j theta is cos theta plus j sin theta, making note of such things. This expression, which captures the fact that any periodic signal can be written in terms of sinusoids of the same period and its higher harmonics, okay, can be cast in this particular form. Okay, so now what this equation is telling is I'm building this signal using these elementary functions. Okay, just as I was building the signal with sinusoids and cosines, now I have just written sine and cosine in terms of complex exponentials. I'm building the signal out of these complex exponentials, and the quantity of each such complex exponential that I need is given by ak. Just as the quantity of sine 2 pi by t signal that I need to construct u of t is a1, and quantity of cos 2 pi by t is b1, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I'm just representing a signal in terms of its building blocks, and a building block I have chosen in this particular case is e to the power j 2 pi, this particular complex exponential. Now this argument holds for a periodic signal. Now what about an arbitrary signal which is not periodic? Well, it turns out that with minor tweaking, this expression itself can be employed to also work for non-periodic signals. To do that, what you do is you have assumed that this time period is t, right? So you assume that this t is very large, so large that the signal does not repeat itself in the duration of your experiment. So that means that the t, capital T, is tended to infinity. Okay, and when you do that, the Fourier series automatically goes over to the Fourier transform, and you end up this e to the power these are discrete values, 2 pi by t times k. K will be 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. That will get converted to a continuum of frequencies, and those continuum of frequencies is what is e to the power j omega t here, and ak here gets replaced by u of j omega times d omega. Okay, is that slightly better?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just representing the signal in terms of some other elementary signal, some other building block. Okay, so u of t is not related to e to the power j omega t. Okay,
sir, after that, when t tends to infinity, will you say it again? What is done after that?
So when t tends to infinity, you can show that the Fourier series becomes the Fourier transform. That's it. Okay, so this representation, when t tends to infinity, capital T tends to infinity, the summation becomes an integral. Okay, and this will become a general complex exponential e to the power j omega t. Okay, because k can assume values from minus infinity to plus infinity, and capital T is tended to infinity, so this number is going to become exceedingly small, vanishingly small, and so on and so forth. I don't want to get into this right now. I mean, if you want, I can share the notes that I have prepared in connection with this, where transitioning from Fourier series to Fourier transform is explained better. So one other person had a question now. Dhanashri had a question probably, right? What is it?
I just wanted to confirm, means in case of periodic signal, in that series we have ak as constant, and whereas for non-periodic signal we will have that coefficient at some integral. Is it correct?
So ak will be in a periodic case. Ak, the expression for that is, I think, given by 1 by t integral minus t by 2 to t by 2. Okay,
Yes.
u of t e to the power minus j 2 pi by capital T k tt. Okay, so if you see here, this looks very much like u of j omega, with the exception that 1 over t is not there. Okay, so in the limit that capital T tends to infinity, this 1 over 2 pi t becomes d omega. Okay, that's what appears here. Okay,
Yes.
so there are very close parallels, therefore, between Fourier series and Fourier transform.
Okay.
So what was your question again? Did this answer your question?
Yes, sir. Actually, I thought AK is a constant, so it was wrong. Yes, Fourier series, it is also in the form of integral.
What do you mean by a constant? You mean were you expecting this to be a function of time or something?
Sir, I consider it like we consider in vector spaces, so I was connecting it with that. So it is wrong. Sorry, sir.
Okay, all right. So let us get back to Fourier transform, which is applicable to any signal, periodic or not. And let us, just to become familiar with Fourier transform, let us obtain the Fourier transform for a few common signals, and then we will get to, the Fourier transform of a convolution, which is what we are really interested in, because the convolution integral was what stumped us and got us to look for alternate ways to, represent the relation between input and output. Okay, so some of the Fourier transforms of some common signals. So one of the signals, is an impulse. It's also called as a Dirac delta function. Okay. Here is one version of an impulse. You might have come across this earlier. So this is our u of t. Okay. It is a rectangle of vanishingly small width, 1 by delta. Sorry, delta is the width. Sorry, and height which is tended to infinity, in such a manner that the area under this signal is equal to unity. Okay, so delta is tended to 0. This is one way of imagining an impulse input. Okay, so when you strike a system with a hammer, this is generally the kind of force that the system experiences as function of time. For that brief time that the hammer is in contact with that material, there's a very large force, and that's captured by this height being very large, and then that force becomes small, vanishes as soon as the contact between the two is lost. Okay, so this is an impulse input. It's a very important input, although the way we have developed the subject so far doesn't shed enough light on its importance. It's nevertheless a very important input, which you will see if you take other courses or read up other material in relation to linear system theory. Okay, so the Fourier transform of an impulse input, it's called delta of t. Okay, so if this impulse is centered at 0, it is delta of t. If this impulse is applied at some time t naught, then it's delta of t minus t naught. Okay, so what is the Fourier transform of delta of t? E to the power minus j omega t delta of t dt, infinity to infinity. This is the Fourier transform u of j omega. And you can do this integral in a very simple manner. You see that delta of t is 0 for all times that are slightly even a little bit greater than 0. So every single thing here is going to get weighted down to 0 beyond time t equal to 0. So this has some value only around t equal to 0. So around t equal to 0, e to the power minus j omega t is e to the power minus j0, which is 1. So u of j omega therefore is equal to 1 times integral 0 to capital delta of t dt, and that's equal to 1. Okay, now what is the physical meaning of this of this result? What this means is that in order to reconstruct a signal like this, I need equal quantities of every single complex exponential e power j omega t. Okay, so if I take equal quantities, 1 unit of this times d omega, okay, of this of a particular omega and of the next omega and the omega after that and so on and so forth, and integrate the whole thing from minus infinity to plus infinity, I get delta of t. Okay, so this is what this result means. I need equal quantities of, I think, at least to me, I find this analogy between a house and its constituent materials and the Fourier transform very useful. Okay, there are different materials and we are just cataloging how much of each material is necessary to construct our house. In this case, it's our time domain signal. Okay, next signal is e to the power a decreasing exponential. Okay, e to the power minus at, where a is greater than 0, and usually the signal is started at time t equal to 0. Okay, you don't really worry about what happens for t less than 0, because for a linear system, especially linear time invariant system, where you fix your time origin is not very important. Okay, because the system behaves the same regardless of at what time you start the system. Okay, so this is usually assumed to start at time t equal to 0, and to capture that fact, slightly more precisely, we multiply this with another signal called a Heaviside step. This looks like a very fancy word, but the function is very, very simple. Okay, a Heaviside step function is one whose value is 0 till t equal to 0, and the value is 1 for t greater than or equal to 0. So this is 1 of t. Okay, this is a Heaviside step. What does this so this function do? It just weighs down everything to 0 for time t less than 0 and allows the function to show its natural form only beyond t equal to 0. Okay, that's all that this does. Just a very fancy name for a very simple function. So what is the Fourier transform for this? U of j omega is equal to integral minus infinity to infinity e to the power minus at e to the power minus j omega t dt, and you see that this is equal to integral minus infinity to infinity. Since this is e to the power minus at times 1 of t, the lower limit of the integral becomes 0. Okay, because between t equal to minus infinity and t equal to 0, this entire signal assumes a value 0. okay, because 1 of t is 0 for t less than 0. So the lower limit becomes 0, upper limit remains infinity. So e to the power minus a plus j omega t dt. And if you do this very simple integration, you get 1 by a plus j omega as a Fourier transform. Okay. Next is a sinusoidal signal. So what does this indicate? See, this is a complex number, right? So unlike the previous one, which was a real number, when we say quantity, we tend to imagine real numbers, whereas this quote unquote quantity can also be a complex number. What does the complex number interpretation mean? So I have the signal e power j omega t, okay, and the quantity of it that I need to construct this particular signal, which is e to the power minus at, is 1 by a plus j omega. So as omega tends to infinity, as you can see, I need smaller and smaller quantities of those complex exponentials whose omega is very large, okay, whereas I need fairly large quantities of complex exponentials when omega is very small. In fact, when omega is close to 0, I need the 1 by a units of that complex exponential, okay, to construct the signal e power minus at. Of course, I always have this d omega, which I keep dropping because it's not very relevant for very helpful in our discussions. So this is the interpretation, right? So what does it mean to say that this is a complex number? What this means is that the quantity that I need is, of course, going to be square root of 1 plus a square plus omega square, which is the modulus of this complex number. And then this signal also has to be shifted in phase, because 1 by a plus j omega can be written as 1 by square root of a square plus omega square e to the power j tan inverse of omega by a. That's how I can write 1 by a plus j omega. I can write it in its polar form in terms of r theta, right? So therefore, the phase of this is therefore e to the power. So this can be written therefore as e to the power minus j tan inverse of omega by a divided by square root of a square plus omega square times this. That's it. This is what 1 by a plus j omega is. Okay. So what this means is that not only do I need to take a certain quantity of it, but I also need to change the phase of this somewhat. So instead of this being e to the power j omega t, it will now have to be e to the power j omega t minus tan inverse of omega by a. Okay, so that complex exponential's phase has to be shifted a little bit, and its quantity has to be taken in this particular proportion, 1 by square root of a square plus omega square, for me to ultimately reconstruct this particular signal with it. Okay, this is the way in which you can, at some slightly greater physical level, imagine this the Fourier transform. Any questions so far? Okay, so let us take one last signal just for the sake of getting familiar, warming up to this particular tool, and this is sine omega naught t. Okay, some periodic function. What is the frequency content of this periodic function? You can intuitively guess what it would be. There's only one frequency, right? So that u of j omega d omega should be unity, because there's only one particular frequency. So what that means is that u of j omega should be on the order of 1 by d omega. Or in other words, it should be infinitely tall at just that particular frequency alone. Okay, so you can do this more formally and show that the Laplace transform, Fourier transform is 1 by 2 pi j times an impulse function, as we expected, because that entire there's only one frequency. All the energy is concentrated at one frequency, omega naught. Okay, is going to be equal to delta of omega minus omega naught minus delta of omega plus omega naught. Okay, so in the frequency axis, there will be an impulse, of magnitude, an impulse at omega equal to omega naught plus omega naught. There will be another impulse of negative magnitude at minus omega naught. Okay, so there's only one particular frequency represented in the signal. Okay, so it's not very difficult to comprehend that there's only one building block for this particular signal. Okay, so this was intended to get us to be a little more familiar with Fourier transforms. But here is where the next result is what we are really looking for. Okay, so you have y of t is equal to integral c e to the power a t b u t minus tau u of tau d tau. This is the input-output relationship in the time domain, and the integral goes from 0 to t. Okay, now what is the Fourier transform of y, and how is it related to the Fourier transforms of these other terms here? Before we do that, as I said, we are focusing on single input, single output systems. So the c e to the power a t b is a scalar, because b is a n by 1 vector, a is a n by n matrix, c is a 1 by n vector. Okay, n by 1, yeah, that's it. N by 1 because it's a scalar input, 1 by n because it's scalar output. Okay, so therefore this is a scalar, and I use this expression g to represent it, and it's a function of t minus tau. Okay, and this is u of tau d tau. So what is the Fourier transform of this particular product of the convolution integral? What you can show, and I'm not going to do this mind-numbing math here. It's all fairly straightforward integration and so on and so forth. But it's an important result, and I'll just state the result. The proof for that, you can look up any standard mathematics textbook, especially for engineers. If you wish, I can also share some notes where I have derived this myself. Okay, this is going to be the product of the Laplace transforms, the Fourier transforms of the function g and the Fourier transform of the function u. Okay, this was what we were interested in, because in the case of the negative feedback amplifier, we could clearly understand the extent by which we could reject a disturbance or achieve robustness to parameter variation, parameter uncertainty, because the relation between the output and the input was a simple proportionality and not a complicated convolution integral. Okay, so this result is very useful for us, and this term here, g of j omega, is called as a transfer function. Okay, transfer function of the system. Any questions so far? Okay, so now let us breathe some life into this equation by comparing it with a corresponding equation for the negative feedback amplifier. So in the case of the negative feedback amplifier, I had the gain to be k and had the input to be u, the output to be y, and the relation was u is equal to y is equal to k times u. If I took the Fourier transform of this, okay, the Fourier transform of y is equal to k Fourier transform of k times u, and k is a constant, so it comes out because Fourier transform is a linear operator. I can show that y of j omega for that case is simply k, a constant, times u of j omega. Okay, whereas here y of j omega is g of j omega times u of j omega. So what was this constant in that particular example? It was an amplifier, right? It amplified the input voltage in that particular case. Here we are talking of a general linear system. So, but if you want to draw analogies, because analogies are useful, you can view the linear system as a frequency content amplifier. What is u of j omega? It is a frequency content of that particular signal u of t. It represents the quantity of the complex exponential e power j omega t that is needed to construct my signal u of t. Okay, so that's the frequency content. Now, what a regular amplifier does is when you pass the signal u of t through that amplifier, it amplifies that signal completely, which also means that it amplifies every single frequency component by the same factor. And that is what is captured by this equation here. Regardless of what u of j omega was, regardless of what the omega was, at every single omega, the frequency content got increased by a factor k, so that the frequency content of the output was always k times higher than the frequency content of the input. Okay, whereas with a general linear system which demonstrates dynamics, okay, this guy here is in general a function of omega. Okay, so here too the system is behaving like an amplifier. So at a particular frequency omega, if u of j omega was the frequency content of that original signal, that got amplified by a frequency specific gain, which is g of j omega. Okay, at a different omega, okay, unlike in the amplifier case where for a different omega also the amplification was k, here at a different omega the amplification may not be k. Okay, it would be something else. It may not be the same as what it was at the first omega. It would be something else. So this amplification analogy is still valid, except that this amplifier has its amplification ratio being a function of frequency. That's it. Okay, so a linear system, I can write it here, is a frequency dependent, let me put it this, frequency content amplifier, and the amplification gain is also a function of frequency. Okay, so linear system is a frequency content amplifier, and that is what is captured here. Whatever was the frequency content of the input signal got increased or decreased after it passed through the linear system, and this is the output of the linear system. By how much did it increase? It depends on the particular frequency that we are talking about, and each frequency has its own extent by which it got increased or decreased, and that's captured by this dependence of the amplification ratio on the frequency omega. Okay, so any questions about this physical interpretation? So what you need to do therefore is again to draw analogies between the first case and the second one. If let us say my signal u of t had a certain frequency content, now I represent the frequency content of my signal and I write magnitude of u of j omega here. Okay, so let us say my signal had a certain frequency content between omega lower and omega upper, omega L and omega U, which means that I needed this much amount of that particular frequency to construct the signal, that much amount to of the next frequency, and so on. So this is a frequency spectrum. Okay, then in the case of the amplifier, the regular amplifier of the kind that Black worked with, there was an amplification factor which was frequency independent, okay, which was a constant. I just multiplied these two signals and I got, therefore a signal which was just a scaled version of the first one. That's it. It became a taller heap, but of the same shape. Okay. Now, on the other hand, if I have this in the present case where you have a linear system which exhibits dynamics, you can view that linear system again as an amplifier. So if this is again that original signal that is fed to the amplifier, omega L and omega H, omega upper, omega U. The amplification ratio, however, is frequency dependent. It may be higher at one frequency, it may be lower at one frequency, it may suddenly go up at a different frequency, come down again, and so on and so forth. So each of these frequency contents therefore is going to get increased or decreased depending on the magnitude of these amplification ratio. And the resulting frequency spectrum is going to therefore be a product of these two, but it's not going to possess the same shape. But it's easy for me, since it's a product operation which is far more intuitive compared to convolution integration, I can predict roughly what would happen to this heap. I would, for example, if there's a peak here in the gain, I would expect that there will be a corresponding peak also in the response. Okay, that particular frequency content would be amplified a lot more. And therefore, when I look at a time domain response, I will see a lot more of those oscillations in the output, and so on and so forth. Okay. So this is the physical interpretation of that particular expression. So now what we can do is use this for feedback purposes. So here I have a system. Okay. I am giving u of t and I'm getting y of t out, but I can instead look at the frequency content individually. So I can look at what happens to this particular frequency alone. Let us say some frequency omega. Okay, how much of that frequency is there at the input? It is u of j omega. There's a d omega there, which I will omit it for the sake of simplicity. I pass it through the system. How much did it get amplified by? The amount it got amplified by is dependent only on that frequency, not on other frequencies. And that number is going to be simply g of j omega times u of j omega. Okay, this is my output at that frequency omega. Okay, now I feed this back. So I can divide up therefore my signal and the feedback operation as per into feedback operation for each of the individual frequency components. Okay, frequency contents. So I have R here, I can replace it with the corresponding frequency content of the reference itself at that particular frequency, R of j omega. And then the difference between the two is the frequency content at that frequency of the error, E of j omega. And that is passed through. Let us say we continue to stick with the same gain K1 for this particular case also. Then this is going to be my feedback system. Okay. And in a manner analogous to what you had, what we derived earlier, let us say this system experiences an output disturbance. Okay. This is G. And let us say I'll draw an output disturbance here, D out of j omega. Then the output of that is what is fed back here. This is my y of j omega. Then I can show that y of j omega is d of j omega times 1 by 1 plus k1 times g of j omega. Okay. Now you compare this expression with the frequency content of the output in relation to the frequency content of the disturbance for the case when you had a proportionality for your plant, a proportional gain as for your plant. So there was no dynamics. So the gain was not a function of omega. It was a constant equal to k. These are very similar to one another. Don't you agree with me? So let us say I want, a 100-fold attenuation in disturbance. In the case of this dynamic system also, what do I need to do? See, since it is 100 is very much greater than 1, right? So I can, this is roughly therefore equal to d of j omega divided by k1 times g of j omega. Because k1 times k is going to be a very large number. So it's roughly equal to d of j omega divided by k1 times k. Now if I wanted 100-fold attenuation of the disturbance, I had to choose k1 times k to be equal to 100. Okay. Here what should I do? I should simply choose k1 times g of j omega to be equal to 100. That's it. But unfortunately here, this gives me an expression for k, direct expression for k1. The feedback gain, the controller gain k1 that I need to use in order to attenuate the disturbance by a factor of 100 is directly obtained from this expression. Here on the other hand, it's a little bit more complicated because g of j omega is a function of omega. Okay. So if I pick a particular omega, I will have associated with it a certain gain k1 that gives me, the product to be around 100. Okay. So how do I pick if I want to go with a simple controller? So I don't want my gain k1 to be, a function of frequency. I just want it to be a simple controller. What do I do? What I do is the following. See, g of j omega has a certain dependence on omega between omega lower and omega upper. Okay. So let us say the dependence is something like this, is monotonically decreasing as function of frequency, this magnitude of g of j omega. Okay. Let us say it is decreasing. Then for what value of the frequency is the gain g the smallest? It is at this particular frequency. In this particular case, it is omega low upper. Right? Now, if I choose a gain k1 such that for that particular scenario, the product of these two is equal to 100, then for all other frequencies, do you agree with me that the product of these two will be greater than 100? That's true, because I have searched for that particular frequency at which G assumes its lowest value. And I find it in this particular schematic, I find it to be omega lower. Okay, so I choose that to be the frequency that I use for determining the gain K1. And I choose such a K1 that the product of these two is 100. In other words, I choose K1 to be equal to 100 by omega upper, G times magnitude of G times J omega upper. Okay, if I have chosen this to be the gain K1, since G is greater than G upper at all other frequencies, the gain is going to be greater than 100 at all other frequencies. So what does that tell you? That tells you that for other frequencies, okay, other than omega upper, the corresponding frequency content of the output would be more than 100 times lesser than the frequency content at omega upper. So at omega upper itself, I have succeeded in reducing the frequency content by a factor of 100 by choosing K1 in an appropriate manner. At other frequencies, this number is going to be greater than 100. So the corresponding frequency content is going to get attenuated by a factor greater than 100. And is this something for me to be unhappy about? Of course not. I'm not concerned about the disturbance being faithfully reproduced at the output. Okay, even if there is some distortion that happens in the output signal that is related to the disturbance, I don't really care. All I want is this disturbance to just go away from my system. I don't want it to bother me. And you see that choosing K1 based on this criterion allows me to do that. I'm able to attenuate every single frequency content by a factor of 100. So you see, therefore, that I'm able to achieve in a very transparent way a controller structure that allows me to reject the disturbance by the desired amount. In this case, the desired amount was 100. If you wanted a different number, 50 or whatever else, you could do that also. Okay. If you wanted different extents of disturbance rejection at different frequencies, then this K1 alone may lead to a conservative design. You may have to choose a dynamic controller, which we will see later on. But you get the idea of how, in a very transparent way, you can take care of designing a controller to achieve the desired quantified amount of disturbance rejection. Okay, because it's a proportional relationship between the input and the output when you go to the Fourier domain. Any questions about this procedure? Okay. Again, it may be useful to think of the, your house analogy. So what you want is to reduce, you want the house to vanish away. The house in your particular case is this disturbance signal. Okay, it has a certain frequency content. It has a certain number of big boulders, it has a certain number of bricks, certain number of gravel, etc., etc. Every one of them has to be reduced by a factor of 100. Okay, some of them get reduced by a factor more than 100. Some others get reduced by a factor of exactly 100. But ultimately, the new house that you get after passing this original house through your linear system, okay, which is captured by this transfer function here, is going to have every single component attenuated at least by a factor 100. So the new house is going to be at least 100 times lesser. So even without going to the time domain, I can predict that the output disturbance would have been attenuated at least by a factor 100, even in the time domain, by looking at how its frequency contents have been affected. Looking at this expression in the frequency domain. Okay, so this is the the route forward for designing robust systems in a transparent manner and in a manner in which you can directly relate the controller structure K1, the controller gain in this particular case, to the extent of performance that you want. So contrast this with the pole placement strategy that we talked about in case of time domain control design. So that was the strategy that we introduced when we modeled our system using the state space formalism. You had these gains K1 and K2 and so on. That K vector was defined for state feedback. it was very clear to us how to pick the elements of the K vector if you wanted certain stability specifications. You wanted the poles of your closed loop system to be located at certain desired positions, then pole placement by definition was the way to do it. You could very easily, by using state feedback, determine the gains of your feedback signal such that the closed loop poles are placed exactly where you wanted them to be placed. Okay, so that was very nice, but there was no direct correlation between those same gains that you have picked and the extent by which that same controller can achieve disturbance rejection, or for that matter robustness. So even if, let us say, I have some uncertainty in G, okay, the same equation can be used, a very similar equation can be used. So all I need to do is I need to choose my K. Instead of this being G of j omega u, I can just replace it with minimum of magnitude of G of j omega. If my plant parameters are uncertain, that will translate to uncertainty in the magnitude of my G of j omega. Okay, if I know the limits of uncertainty, I will know over what range G of j omega can vary between these two frequencies, omega L and omega upper. Okay, I pick the lowest value that it might assume, okay, for the various parameters that can change, for the original dynamic system. I'll pick the lowest value of G of j omega, and I choose my gain K1 such that it is 100 by minimum of 100 by that lowest value. Then I will be sure that for every other possible value of G of j omega and for every other possible value of omega, my gain, my product K1 times G will always be greater than 100. So I will therefore be able to attenuate a disturbance or achieve tracking performance, which once again is robust to within 99%. Okay, there's going to be only 1% variation because of uncertainty in the plant model if I were to go with this strategy. Okay, so both the problem of achieving robustness to plant uncertainty and the problem of achieving robustness or rejection of disturbances, whether it be output or input, can be handled in a very transparent and quantitative manner in this new domain, in this language of frequency content. Okay, so this is why we use this for doing design, and we shall see how we do that in the next couple of classes. As attractive as this machinery is, I hope I have convinced you that there's a world of difference and ease of use in comparison to state space based disturbance rejection and frequency domain based disturbance rejection, because here a convolution integral is replaced by a product. Okay, that's at the heart of why this becomes so straightforward in the frequency domain. Okay, there are still some problems with this machinery. Okay, one of them, chief among them, is the fact that not all signals possess a Fourier transform. Okay, so Fourier transform of a signal is u of t e to the power minus j omega t dt. You see, e power minus j omega t is bounded. Its magnitude is always equal to 1, right? And this integral goes from plus infinity to minus infinity. And this is u of j omega, right? Now, if let us say I take a ramp signal, u of t is equal to t, okay, then the signal's value itself tends to infinity as time t goes to infinity. And what is the value of this integral for such a signal? Okay, then e power minus j omega t will result in infinitely large oscillations in that signal, right? U of t times e to the power minus j omega t will be an oscillating signal. But the oscillations will keep growing linearly with distance away from t equal to 0, with time away from time greater than t equal to 0. So computing that, the integral itself becomes undefined for such a signal. The same is true also for u of t equal to e to the power at, where a is greater than 0, an increasing exponential. This is t, this is u. E to the power at looks something like this. It starts at 1 and it escapes to infinity as time t goes to infinity. Okay, even this signal, since it is unbounded, okay, does not possess a Fourier transform. Okay, more generally, you can show that for a signal to possess a Fourier transform, it should be square integrable. Okay, or in other words, magnitude of or u square dt infinity to infinity should be well defined, should be a real number, maybe should be less than infinity. Let me put it that way. Okay, there are many signals, however, of interest to control engineers which are not square integrable. One of them is already given here, a ramp signal. Okay, where would we provide such a ramp signal? When I want to spin a motor, okay, how does the angle theta change with time? It increases linearly with time if I'm spinning the motor at a constant speed, right? So that signal, that angle theta as function of time would look like a ramp. Okay, there are many other instances where a ramp signal is used by us control engineers, and therefore for those signals it is unfortunate and sad that such a transparent technique as Fourier transforms is unapplicable. E to the power at is a mode that we routinely come across in connection with unstable systems. Okay, so if the system is unstable, then one of the modes of its response will be e to the power at, where a is greater than 0. It's again very sad and unfortunate that such a mode cannot be understood in the language of Fourier transforms. Okay, whereas such systems are routinely encountered by us control engineers, and we have to devise ways to stabilize them. Of course, time domain gave us a very transparent way to do that. State feedback helped us to stabilize it. But it would be nice if we can realize similar advantages also in the frequency domain, because performances are very easily designed for in the frequency domain, unlike in the time domain. Disturbance rejection and robustness and so on and so forth. Okay, so what is the way out of this situation? Any questions so far? So the way out of the situation is to somehow weigh down this signal u of t, which is on its own, not square integrable, weigh it down by another function such that it becomes square integrable. Okay, so suppose I define a function u1, which is an exponential function which is a decreasing exponential, e power minus sigma t. So Krishna has a question. Yes, Krishna.
Sir, these are all for steady state performance, right?
Which one?
This analysis that we are doing.
Well, the analysis can also be done for transient performance. I don't see why that would be ruled out here. Steady state is also definitely included, but transients can also be understood using this machinery. Okay. So our goal is to find a workaround to make sure that this very nice and transparent tool of Fourier transforms is applicable also to signals which are not square integrable. Okay. So what I do therefore is I multiply the signal u of t with a weighing function. In this case, I have chosen this function to be e power minus sigma t. E power minus sigma t is a decreasing exponential, and its rate of decrease is captured by this coefficient sigma. Okay. So if I take this signal and multiply it with the signal u of t, which could be either a ramp u of t equal to t, or an increasing exponential, or whatever else, you see that if I choose sigma to be high enough, in both cases I can drive the product to 0, right? Because e power minus sigma t descends to 0 much faster than a ramp signal escapes to infinity. So when I take the product, I can show, even by using L'Hospital's rule or whatever else, that the product actually goes to 0. The same is true with an increasing exponential also. If I choose sigma to be greater than a, then the product of an increasing exponential and e power minus sigma t will again be a decreasing exponential, which will decrease at the rate, it will be of the kind e power minus of sigma minus a times t. So if sigma is greater than a, this will go to 0. So by using these functions, by using these weighing functions, I can define new signals u1 which would possess a Fourier transform, right? So I can therefore write such a signal u1 as integral 1 by 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity u of capital J omega e to the power j omega t d omega. where u of capital u1 of capital J omega, sorry, where u1 of capital J omega is the Fourier transform of small u1. What is that? Equal to 1 by 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity. What is u1 by definition? It is integral minus infinity to infinity small u1 e power minus j omega t dt, okay, times e power j omega. I'll use d tau here so that we don't get confused. E power j omega t d omega. Okay. Now what is u1 in terms of u? I shall write it both on the left hand side as well as on the right hand side. This u1 of tau is u1 of t. Okay. u1 of t is e power minus sigma t u of t, and that's equal to 1 by 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity, this one, integral minus infinity to infinity u of t e power minus sigma t e power minus j omega t omega tau d tau u of tau, then multiplying this other thing d omega. Okay. Now, as I said, there is really no loss of generality in picking the lower limit of this of the time axis to be 0. So we can always apply, we can always assume that our inputs are applied starting from time t equal to 0. Okay. So that origin of the time axis can always be fixed by us, and we can assume that u of tau is started at time tau equal to 0. So therefore, before that there was no input. So therefore, the lower limit of this integral can be made equal to 0. So this will therefore be 1 by 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity integral 0 to infinity u of tau e power minus of sigma plus j omega tau d tau, okay, times e power j omega t d omega. Now I send e power sigma t to the right hand side, and I get u of t to be equal to 1 by 2 pi integral minus infinity to infinity integral 0 to infinity u of tau e to the power minus sigma plus j omega tau d tau times e power j sigma plus omega t d omega. Okay. This is what I do. And then I do something which will cast it in a form that you must be very familiar with. I define the variable s to be equal to sigma plus j omega, so that I would have that this here is going to be equal to integral 0 to infinity u of tau e power minus s tau d tau, okay, and this is going to be equal to e power j e power st sigma plus j omega, sorry, t. So this is going to be e to the power st. This is going to be minus infinity to infinity, and if s is sigma plus j omega, ds is equal to j d omega, because only omega is varying here. Sigma is a constant. Okay, j d omega. So I can therefore replace d omega with ds. So d omega is ds by j. Okay, and is 1 by 2 pi. So what I get therefore is that u of t is equal to 1 by 2 pi j. So omega in the previous example went from minus infinity to infinity. So s goes from sigma minus j infinity to sigma plus j infinity. Okay, and then I have this 0 to infinity u of tau e power minus s tau d tau e to the power st ds. Okay, now I define a new transformation. I will call this capital U of s, which is the Laplace transform of the signal u. Okay, so I would therefore get u of t to be equal to integral sigma minus j infinity to sigma plus j infinity integral 0 to capital U of s e to the power st ds. Okay, let us pause for a minute. U of s is defined, of course. You have come across this in your undergrad, because all of you raised your hand when I asked you, is equal to u of tau e power minus s tau d tau. I can replace tau with t. It will not make any difference because it's simply a variable of integration. Okay, this is a Laplace transform of u of t. So our inability to obtain the Fourier transform for a signal u of t got us to weigh it down. with a decreasing exponential, and that naturally led us to the Laplace transform. Okay, and what you see if you compare this expression with the expression that we got for Fourier transform, this 1 by 2 pi j, right? Minus infinity to infinity, u of j omega e power j omega t d omega. You see a beautiful analogy, a parallel between the two. In the first case, in the Fourier transform case, I was trying to construct my signal u of t in terms of complex exponentials e power j omega t. So I was trying to construct my house using this set of materials, e power j omega t. Okay, the quantity of each material I needed was this particular one, and I added them all up to get the actual signal u of t. In this case, in the case of Laplace transform, I'm trying to construct the same. I'm making an attempt to construct a signal once again, but this time not in terms of e power j omega t, which are benign functions, okay, which do not have the power to arrest the growth of a signal u of t if it is tending to infinity. Instead, I choose to construct it with more powerful elementary functions, and those are these complex exponentials e power st. Instead of e power j omega t, I construct them out of e power st, and the quantity of e power st that I need for a particular s is given by u of s times ds. Okay, I add that all up to get my signal u of t. Of course, there's a scaling factor here, 1 by 2 pi and 1 by 2 pi j, etc., etc. But this breeds some meaning or some physical interpretation to the act of taking the Laplace transform of a signal. This is also, if you see, a frequency content in some sense. But whereas in the Fourier transform case, the frequency omega was a real number, in the Laplace transform case, the frequency will be a complex number. Okay, so this is the frequency content of complex frequency. So that's what it is. Okay, so the reason we did this was also clear. So for certain signals, you did not have a Fourier transform. Therefore, instead, you went to Laplace transform, Laplace domain, because such signals can possess Laplace transform. So let us look at the Laplace transform of a few common signals, some of the ones that I pointed out earlier. So u of t and u of s. So if the input is a Heaviside step, that's the u of t. There's a step input, which is a very common kind of input that we use in control system control system field to characterize the response of dynamic systems. The corresponding Laplace transform is 1 by s. T times 1 of t. So it starts a ramp starting at t equal to 0. It's 1 by s square. Okay, if you have e to the power at times 1 of t, okay, it is 1 by s minus a, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's worth pointing out that all these assume that the sigma that you are choosing for weighing down your response is large enough that function e power minus sigma t times u of t goes to 0 as time t tends to infinity. So that sigma has to be large enough. So in this particular case, for example, the increasing exponential, your sigma has to be greater than a. Okay, in case of these other signals, your sigma has to simply be greater than 0. Okay, so in the complex plane, this represents a certain region. So in this case, this is sigma, this is j omega, this is the complex plane. So sigma greater than 0 represents greater than a represents the shaded region, which is to the right side of sigma equal to a straight line. Okay, this region is therefore called as a region of convergence. It's only in this particular region that a Laplace transform is defined of a signal. If I go to the other region, if I pick a value of s, which is to the left of this region of convergence, even for the Laplace transform case, the signal will blow up. Okay, so that's worth keeping in mind. So it turns out that even in the Laplace domain, because in fact, if you have learned Laplace transforms, you don't need to do too much more to understand Fourier transforms. All you need to do is set sigma to 0, and you are immediately transported to the Fourier domain. Okay, so if you learn Laplace transforms, then Fourier transforms are a piece of cake. But unlike Fourier transforms, Laplace transforms are not as useful for performance engineering. Okay, if I want to reject a certain disturbance by a certain amount, it is very easy to imagine the spectrum of the disturbance or the frequency content and then go about doing design using that information. And in fact, some of the tools that we would talk about later, Nyquist plots and Bode plots, do exactly that. Whereas Laplace transforms, on the other hand, there's one more parameter available to you, sigma, and what does that physically mean? Not very intuitive, and so on and so forth. So it's not very useful for performance engineering. On the other hand, it is very useful for stability engineering. So there's one design tool called as a root locus, which is based on the Laplace transform representation of a dynamic system. Okay, but nevertheless, the same product relationship between the output, Laplace transform of the output, and the Laplace transform of the input is also true for for this case as well. So the Laplace transform of the output and Laplace transform of the input are connected by a gain once again, and that gain is now dependent on that variable s. So what is the structure of G of S for the kind of systems that we are looking at? We shall take a look at that and stop today's lecture. Okay. Oh, before I talk about that, I think I have to maybe write out one or two theorems, but let me put this thing here. So the system we were looking at was nth derivative of y plus a1 times nth minus 1th derivative of y, etc., plus an y is equal to bm u mth derivative of u, etc., up to b1 u. So this was the system that we were looking at. Okay. So if I were to take the Laplace transform on both sides, Laplace transform is also a linear operator. I would get Laplace transform of y power n, etc., Okay. Here is where I want to just put down one theorem before we proceed. So if I have a signal u and its Laplace transform is capital U, if I have a signal that is d by dt of u, okay, and the initial conditions are 0, then the Laplace transform is s times u. So similarly, if I have integral of u dt, integral 0 to t u dt, u d tau, the Laplace transform is u of s divided by s. Okay, and you can do this by induction, and for every higher derivative, d square u by dt square is going to be, the Laplace transform will be s square us, and so on and so forth. So if I have the nth derivative of y here, its Laplace transform will be s power n times the Laplace transform of y itself. Okay, there are other terms which are related to initial conditions, but we are assuming that the initial conditions of y and u are both equal to 0. So we are not dealing with them here. Plus s power n minus 1 of y of s times a1, etc., plus an times capital Y of s will be equal to bm s power m times u of s, etc., plus b1 times u of s. Okay, so the y of s will therefore be equal to bm s power m plus bm minus 1 sm minus 1, etc., up to b1 divided by 1 plus s power n plus a1 s power n minus 1, etc., up to an times u of s. So if you compare this with the actual expression, y of s is equal to g of s times u of s, you discover that the form, the structure of g of s is this particular thing. It's a ratio of two polynomials for the system that we have considered. It's going to be bm s power m plus bm minus 1 sm minus 1, etc., up to b1 divided by s power n, etc., plus a1 s power n minus 1 all the way to an. Okay, so this is the structure of the transfer function, and since it's a ratio of two polynomials in s, I can factorize these polynomials. I can write this as some constant k, or maybe kg or something, times s minus z1, s minus z2. How many roots will the numerator polynomial have? It will have m roots because the degree of the polynomial is m. So s minus zm. Okay, and the denominator can also similarly be factorized, and I'll have exactly n factors. So it will be s minus p1, s minus p2, etc., it's up to s minus pn. Okay, so there's a name for these things. If you notice the denominator polynomial, It is no different from the characteristic equation of your state space domain representation of your dynamic system. Okay, so we already have come across these P1, P2 up to Pn in a different form. We call them lambda 1 to lambda n as the eigenvalues of the matrix A. And we then called them also the poles of that system. Why did we call poles was not clear at that point. But this expression makes it clear, because if I were to substitute S is equal to P1 or P2 or any one of these values, this G of S blows up. It goes to infinity. So in the complex plane, in the G plane, real part of G versus imaginary part of G, there are certain discrete locations, namely P1, P2, Pn, and so on, where they're like tents. They go up to infinity at just those locations. That's why they're called poles. They remind you of tent poles that are holding up this otherwise monotonically decreasing fabric. Okay, so P1 to Pn are called the poles of G. Then Z1 to Zm are called the zeros of G, for obvious reasons. Because if I substitute S is equal to Z1 or any one of these terms, this G of S goes to 0. Okay, that's why they're called the zeros. They are the roots of G in some sense. Okay, so I am done. It's 11:30 now. Let me just state two theorems so that we can start on a different topic in the next lecture. We don't have to continue with discussing Laplace transforms. We would have collected all the tools necessary for executing control design. Okay, so two theorems which are of use for us. I'm speeding through Laplace transforms because you have come across this in your undergrad, and I think many of these Laplace transforms of common signals and properties of Laplace transforms, such as the Laplace transform of a derivative of a signal, etc., is something that you're already familiar with. I'm making that assumption here. Okay, there's something called as the initial value theorem. There's something called as the final value theorem. So initial value theorem states that if I have the Laplace transform of a signal U of S, I don't need to go to the time domain to know what its initial value is. Instead, I can compute it using this expression, limit S tends to infinity S times U of S. Okay, and that's equal to limit t tends to 0 small u of t. This is the initial value theorem, very succinct. Okay, the final value theorem is the complement, the converse of this. So I can, just staying in the Laplace domain, looking at the frequency content U of S, I can predict what the final value of that signal U of t will be. And that I can do by tending S to 0, and that would be equal to limit t tends to infinity U of t. So these are two theorems that are very useful, and we will probably be putting them to good use. In particular, you can use the initial value theorem to show that in that structure of G of S, which was a polynomial with the numerator degree being, which was a ratio of two polynomials between the numerator degree being m and the denominator degree being n, and so on. You can show that by using the initial value theorem, you can show that n has to be less than or equal to n has to be greater than or equal to m. Okay, you can show that, although I wouldn't be showing that here. Okay, we wouldn't be using this too much either later on, but this is true for all physical systems. Okay, that emerges from the initial value theorem. The final value theorem helps you predict the final value of a particular signal or the response of a system to a particular input. You need to exercise caution when you are using this. So if I take, for example, a signal such as an increasing exponential e power at, then the Laplace transform is 1 by s minus a. Okay, so limit s tends to 0, s times u of s will be equal to 0. So it seems to indicate that this, if I were to apply final value theorem, the final value of u of t will be 0. Okay, whereas here you see that e to the power at is an increasing exponential, it blows up. Okay, so the reason there is this contradiction is because this theorem is valid provided 0 is within the region of convergence of u of t. Okay, if it's not within the region of convergence, then you cannot apply this theorem. So in this particular case, e to the power at, we saw that the region of convergence was the entire complex plane to the right of sigma equal to a, and that did not include the origin. So here in this other region, Laplace transform is not even defined. So around s is equal to 0, Laplace transform is not even defined. Okay, that's why you cannot apply the final value theorem for this kind of a signal. Okay, otherwise for signals where this is defined, then you can apply it. Okay, so with that I will stop. Any questions? Abhishek Panchal has a question.
Sir, can we apply this theorem like limit s tends to a as us is equals to limit t tends to infinity ut?
S tends to a, is it? But
Yes, sir.
You just to get infinity, if your goal is just to get infinity, you can do that, but there is no basis for that. So if you derive this from first principles, you cannot show that limit s tends to a. This one is equal to t tends to infinity. You cannot show that. Okay.
Okay, sir.
You are hypothesizing that it's a hypothesis on your part. You are thinking that because,
Yes, sir, because
around s is equal to a, this blows up. You expect therefore that that equation to be valid, but when you try to derive it from first principles, you will see that that's not the case.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Any other questions? If there are no questions, so I shall stop the lecture at this point. Thanks a lot, and I apologize once again for joining you guys late today. See you.